A fake HOA cop slapped Ethan with a $5,000 fine for the shade from his century-old oak tree. With a knockoff badge and threats, Mark Decker had been scaring elderly neighbors into silence. But Ethan had one thing Decker didn't expect: a protected landmark and a paper trail. And just wait until you hear how the law and the roots struck back. Ethan Grant pulled into his driveway just after dusk, the sun dipping behind the hills like it always did when he returned from his fieldwork rotations. His job took him across the state most weeks, but nothing ever really changed in Willow Glen, a small, leafy neighborhood tucked into the outskirts of town. At least, that's what he thought. He hadn't even reached the front steps when he noticed something off. A bright yellow slip, wrinkled slightly from the wind, was taped to his door. Thick black letters screamed, "Notice of fine, $5,000 across the top, followed by a citation for excessive shade caused by unapproved arboreal structures. Ethan blinked. Unapproved arboreal structures? He turned instinctively toward the sprawling oak tree that stood like a sentinel in his front yard, its thick trunk wrapped in moss, its limbs casting a soft blanket of shade over the lawn. That tree had been here for generations, predating the subdivision itself. His great-grandparents built the house around it in the 1920s, and his grandfather used to hang a tire swing from the strongest branch. Still standing on the porch, Ethan flipped the notice over. It was stamped and signed, Mark Decker, HOA Compliance Officer, Sector 9. That made Ethan pause. Willow Glen wasn't under any active HOA jurisdiction. There had been talk of forming one years ago, but the idea had fizzled after a few failed votes. And Sector 9? The community barely had one street lamp, let alone zoning sectors. He pulled out his phone, opened the neighborhood contact list, and scanned through the names. No Decker, no HOA board, nothing. Later that night, Ethan grabbed a flashlight and walked down the block. He didn't expect much. Maybe a prank, maybe a misunderstanding. But then he saw it. Another yellow slip taped to his neighbor Martha's door. This one listed a $3,200 fine for unauthorized leaf density. 2 doors down, the Bernard family had a notice pinned to their mailbox. Unregistered deciduous obstruction, $4,750. By the time he reached the 5th house, a quiet dread settled over him. Each citation had different wording, but they all shared one thing in common. They targeted homes with large, healthy trees out front. The handwriting on all the fines matched. So did the signature, Mark Decker. Whoever this guy was, he was hitting the neighborhood with fake rules, fake fines. And somehow, no one had questioned it yet. Ethan stood in the middle of the street, hands in his pockets, the glow of his porch light barely reaching him. Behind him, his oak tree rustled in the breeze, quiet and steady, like it had been for 100 years. But something new had moved into Willow Glen, and it wasn't just the wind. Ethan wasn't the kind of man to jump to conclusions, but after seeing 5 identical citations taped to 5 different homes, all of them targeting longtime neighbors with old trees and quiet yards, he couldn't let it go. The next morning he started making calls. County records, no HOA filings, neighborhood charter, dormant since 2014, online registries, no officers, no meetings, no votes. The entire idea of an HOA in Willow Glen was dead on paper, but Mark Decker wasn't. Ethan drove by the address listed in faint print on the bottom of one of the citations, a vague local sector office, Unit 47. It wasn't an office at all. It was a dented white trailer sitting at the end of a gravel pull-off near the cul-de-sac behind the park. A piece of plywood leaned against the trailer hitch, painted in sloppy block letters, Neighborhood Oversight Authority, Sector Compliance. An old lawn chair sat out front, a cracked cooler beside the steps, and clipped to the door, a metal clipboard with a stack of blank violation forms, carbon paper still fresh. Ethan watched from his car as Decker stepped out. Late 40s, cargo vest, clip-on badge that looked printed from a home office. He strutted like he ran the town. And in his hands, that same clipboard. He crossed the street and marched straight to an elderly couple's front steps, like he belonged there. What Ethan heard next made his blood run cold. Decker didn't knock. He announced, loud enough for the entire block to hear, that the home was in breach of Sector Tree Ordinance 12A, and the owners would face escalating legal consequences if payment wasn't made by the end of the week. The man he was speaking to was Thomas Lane, a 79-year-old widower whose only son had just moved him in a year earlier. Ethan had helped him set up his internet. Thomas looked confused, embarrassed. He kept asking if there was someone he could call, someone official to confirm. But Decker just pointed to his fake badge, said, "You're already looking at him," and handed over an envelope. That evening, Ethan knocked on doors. The stories were all the same. He said we'd be in court if we didn't pay. He told me the city wouldn't protect us because we weren't on the grid. He made it sound like we were breaking real laws. One neighbor, Joan Kelly, 82, a retired teacher, admitted she'd written a check for $1,200 just to avoid escalation. She'd been so rattled, she hadn't even told her daughter. That's when the anger settled in Ethan's chest like a stone. Mark Decker wasn't confused. He wasn't mistaken. He was a predator in a vest, dressing up intimidation as authority, and counting on people being too afraid or too tired to push back. Ethan went home and sat at his kitchen table, staring at the citation. The fraudulent code, the empty signature, the bold confidence of someone who thought no one would stand up. That's when something inside him turned. He wasn't just going to expose Decker. He was going to dismantle everything he'd built, piece by phony piece. What Mark Decker didn't know, what he never bothered to check, was who exactly he'd tried to intimidate. Ethan wasn't just some quiet neighbor with a tech job and a nice lawn. He spent most weekends volunteering at the state Arboretum, helping catalog and digitize the legacy tree records for conservation grants. It was detailed, often tedious work, measuring canopies, logging root systems, mapping protected zones across the state. He'd seen just about every loophole in local preservation law. And his front yard oak? It wasn't just old. It was registered. Tucked deep in the environmental archives was a scanned certificate with Ethan's name and GPS coordinates, designating the tree as a heritage canopy specimen under the county's Green Infrastructure Preservation Act. That oak was legally protected from removal, alteration, even excessive pruning. Not only did Decker have no authority to fine Ethan for it, the tree itself had more legal standing than Decker's entire operation. That night, Ethan sat down and started building. First, he wrote a detailed complaint to the county arborist, attaching photographs, satellite canopy measurements, and a scanned copy of the preservation listing. He added the citation Decker had left on his door, underlined the phrase unauthorized arboreal structure, and politely asked if threatening people over protected trees was considered standard procedure. Then came the real work. Ethan canvassed the block and gathered every notice his neighbors had kept. He organized them by date, wording, and handwriting. He photographed the trailer and its fake signage, then returned with a directional mic and captured Decker's next compliance visit. This time it was to a decorated Vietnam veteran, who Decker warned would be referred to housing court if he didn't pay a fine for branch encroachment. Ethan had the entire thing on tape. Next, he dug into zoning laws. Decker's trailer sat on an easement. It had no registered address, no waste hookups, no fire clearance. According to code enforcement, it was considered an unauthorized semi-permanent structure, and that meant it could be cited for removal under at least 3 separate municipal statutes. By the end of the week, Ethan's digital dossier was 64 pages long. He sent it to the zoning office, the sheriff's department, the county legal bureau, the environmental board, and finally to a reporter he knew from a tree restoration project last spring. The story wasn't just about Ethan's oak. It was about all of them. Every elderly couple too scared to argue, every veteran who was told to pay quietly, every front yard turned into a target for fake authority. It didn't take long. Within days, responses started trickling in. First came a call from the environmental officer, then the county zoning lead, then the assistant district attorney's office. One of them simply said, "Thank you. We've been waiting for something like this to stick." The case file was open. The gears had started turning, and somewhere in that dented trailer at the end of a cul-de-sac, Mark Decker was about to find out just how fast everything he'd built could collapse when someone decided to fight back. It happened on a Tuesday morning, just after 9. Ethan was sipping coffee on his porch when two unmarked county vehicles pulled up beside the curb. A preservation officer stepped out first, followed by a uniformed sheriff's deputy. Neither of them looked like they were in a rush. Calm, steady, purposeful. They weren't here to ask questions. They were here to act. Across the street, Mark Decker emerged from his trailer like he always did, clipboard in hand and sunglasses on, ready to make another round of threats. But when he saw the official county seal on the side of the SUV and the paperwork in the deputy's hand, his entire posture changed. The cease and desist was read aloud. Ethan couldn't hear every word, but he caught the important parts. Impersonation of a public official. Unlawful issuance of non-binding code enforcement. Fraudulent use of regulatory documents. Decker tried to argue, at first. Then the zoning officer showed up, quietly noting every violation tied to the trailer. No sewage hookup, no commercial permit, no address. A tow truck appeared not long after, and before noon, the so-called Neighborhood Oversight Authority was nothing more than a blank patch of gravel where a trailer used to sit. Neighbors gathered in driveways, peeking from windows. Some smiled, some clapped. One woman placed a pitcher of lemonade on Ethan's porch railing and said, "You did that for all of us." But it didn't end there. Later that week, a small crew from the state Arboretum arrived with something wrapped in velvet. They installed it at the base of Ethan's oak tree, a bronze plaque shining in the sunlight. It read, "Designated Heritage Canopy Specimen, protected under County Environmental Code Section 8. 6 inches. Someone brought ribbon. A few local officials stopped by. Even a news crew from the Channel 6 affiliate came to cover the story. They set up their camera under the very tree Decker had tried to fine out of existence. When they interviewed Ethan, he didn't talk about Decker. He didn't need to. He simply looked at the tree, still swaying gently in the breeze, and said, "Funny thing about trees, they've got deeper roots than con men." And that was that. Mark Decker vanished from the county records as quickly as he'd appeared. No charges were ever contested. No apologies were issued. His name disappeared from sidewalks, driveways, and door frames, like dust brushed off the front porch. But the oak, it's still there, tall, steady, untouchable. Its shade stretches proudly across Ethan's lawn, not as a violation, but as a living monument to what happens when truth stands its ground.